Good evening. I know that we are probably live at the moment and that we are going out, and I'm just getting things checked to suss all that out. I know it's riveting television whilst you watch someone looking off screen and getting set up. Although, as my colleague has said before, we don't have a producer, so it takes a bit to get all this done. Turn off my own little sound there. All right, good evening. I think we're live on that stream there. You watch someone looking off screen and getting set up. I just need to turn that volume down. Feeding back on myself, that's good. Okay, that's working there. I'm going to log into our page over here and check that that's all going as well. In just a second. And we are going. Cool. All right. Do we have people online and watching? Hoping so. So, welcome. It's Thursday night. It's live stream. Welcome to the many people who might be tuning in for the first time. You've probably heard a lot about these society live streams we do. They've been going on for quite some time now. You may have received a recommendation to tune in, and you probably heard that it's hosted each night by this devilishly handsome, young, rugged person. And you're probably looking at me strangely right now and trying to work out what the hell's going on. I am not Matt Bailey. It is a pleasure to be with you tonight. I am Andrew Derbidge. I am the Society's Cellarmaster, Director, Chairman, New South Wales State Manager, Brand Ambassador, and your host for tonight's tasting. I say tasting, our live stream gathering, which is going to be a lot of fun. I've got some fun things to talk about. I can see some people tuning in now, which is good. Liam, good to see you, mate. Darren, Dan, Matt, I hope the salmon's going well. Matt, I did see a message earlier. And on that note, Alex, if you're tuned in and watching at the moment, I hope you're, what do you have? Your schnitzel. I hope your schnitzel's working nicely for you. Nicholas, good to see you, mate. You're on the 1.218. Good choice. I approve. You're going to have a lot of fun with that tonight, I can tell you. Mr. Woolley, good to see you as well. Nice work, Dan, on your recent successes as well. Fantastic to see you. And I'm going to just keep glancing off to the side of the camera here to see those comments as they come in. So I hope that's okay with you. So yeah, look, my colleague, Matt Bailey, shout out to Matt. Fantastic work doing this every night. I can't believe he does it every night. But he did have another commitment this evening, so I'm stepping in. So you'll need to put up with me and my voice, I'm afraid. I hope that's okay with you. But we are going to have some fun. Got some things to talk about. Now, I'm also a big believer in audience participation. So if you've got any questions, any comments that you want to throw into the discussion as we go, I'm going to be looking off camera to read those. And that's on the Facebook group, by the way. I don't have my feed to the Facebook page is over here, which is not as good. So if you have any comments and you want to transfer across to our Facebook group rather than the page, that's where I'll see a lot of your comments as they come in. It's Thursday. It's near the end of the week. Timing is beautiful. I got home tonight, went to my letterbox, and what was waiting for me? June outturn. Lovely timing. It's funny when outturn comes out. A lot of work goes into producing our monthly outturn. I do all the proofreading and go through every article and bit of text, and invariably there's some typos to sort out, as well as writing the content for some of it. And you get to that and you're kind of, oh, we've got it out the door. And it's kind of exciting when a week or two later it comes hot off the press and lands. So our June outturn is an absolute cracker. There's some fantastic stuff there. We're taking the opportunity at the moment to put a bit more content in. So there's a few more articles and items in here. There is a fantastic story from Lachlan Watt about Your Dram, Your Way. I'm actually going to touch on that tonight a little bit. And then also my good friend and colleague, Scotty Mansfield, up in our state manager in Queensland, has written a fantastic article as well. So in addition to all the amazing whiskies and things that are on offer there that you can try, There's also some great reading there as well. And look, if you're one of the people who still were still vaguely in isolation and locked up at the moment, there's some good reading material for you. So I commend that to you. You would have seen, presumably, the little promos we put out for tonight. There is a theme for tonight's discussion, and it's called How to Train Your Palate. And we're going to go on to that in just a moment as I look over here. Andy Davis, good to see you, mate. Fantastic. Zeno, hey, good to see you. Zeno's called me Dapper. I don't know about that, mate. I know a lot of brand ambassadors and people in the whiskey community wear these hats. I know it's quite the thing. It's waistcoats as well. Bit of a practical reason for mine. It's quite simple. Look at that. Bald as, light shining down on top, glares into the camera, not a good look. So for me, it's got nothing about trying to look trendy. It is just simply the reality of working with cameras and bad lighting at home. So there you go. I'm a big believer that when we spend time together, we should dram and have whiskey together. I'm going to have a whiskey with you now. And this is a sad, sad evening, a sad moment. There's going to be a bottle kill. I'm going to have to kill a bottle before your very eyes. I don't know how good the image is on your screen there at the moment, but this is an amazing society piece of history, 7.28. At the time it was bottled, it was a 36-year-old from this distillery from the most sublime sherry butt. Distilled in 1968, it was bottled in 2005, and you can see maybe that's all that's left. So I'm going to be killing this bottle with you tonight in one fell swoop. Would you look at the colour? And that's probably going to see me through for the rest of this live stream. It's a good sized dram there. But we're going to be talking about dramming tonight and how to improve your palate and how to train your palate. And so this will help tremendously as I do that. So look, I hope you've poured yourself a dram. I hope you've got something. If it's a society dram, even better. Why not tell me all about it and leave some comments. What's Liam saying here? Problem with lighting and the only solution? Fashion. Well, there you go, mate. I've never considered fashion's not part of my weaponry, I'll tell you. Zena, you're 21. Yeah, you own 2 caps and a waistcoat. Thanks, mate. I appreciate the comment there. I wish I could share this with you. I really do. That is the most amazing, amazing dram. How sad it is that we're saying goodbye to it tonight. So let's get down to business. I'm going to bring up a little window in the background here that hopefully you won't see. Cool. So what are we going to talk about tonight? We're going to talk about how to train your palate. And here we go. How to train your palate. The answer, practice. So thanks for tuning in tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night. No. We can go into more details on that, more info. So training your palate, I jest, but look, practice is important. It's like any skill. It's like any muscle that you need to train. Practice, practice, practice. The more you do it, the better you get at it. But there are some things you need to know about your palate, and particularly your palate, because everyone's palate is different. You need to know some things about your nose, because nose plays a very important part. Interesting, tonight we're talking about palate, how to train your palate, but a lot of tonight's conversation is going to be about our sense of smell and our olfactory senses as well. That's all part of the mix, which we'll chat about. And coming from a good baseline. So I want to share a few things as we go through that. And I don't want to get scientific because I'm not a scientist. I'm certainly not a medical man. I don't know much about it, but I know the basics of how the palate and the nose works. I certainly know a bit about mine. And I can share with you tips and tricks from my journey, and particularly the role I played on the Society's tasting panel for many, many, many years, and how that shaped, well, a lot of the whiskies that we brought into the country and continue to do so. So let's talk about taste and your palate. Now, 20th century Western wisdom was that we had 4 primary things that we could taste. And you probably know them: sweet, salty, sour, bitter. They were the 4. And then in the late 20th century, we came along and decided there was this 5th thing called umami, which is actually a Japanese numbers puzzle that you see people doing on public transport. And umami is savory notes. So sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami, the savory element. And you might think, well, if we've only got 5 primary tastes, how on earth do we taste the hundreds, dare I say, the thousands of different flavors that we perceive? And certainly all the different flavors in whiskey. And that is where our sense of smell comes in, because what we perceive as flavors is actually our palate and our nose working together in tandem. And it's a cliche, it's an old story, and I'm sure you've heard it, but the reality is your sense of taste is very much affected by your sense of smell. And as I say, you've all heard it. If you have a cold, if you have a blocked nose, if you can't get things through your nose, you don't have that taste, that sense of taste. Your taste is tremendously hampered and compromised if your nose isn't working for you. So we have those 5 primary tastes that our palate, our tongues can pick up. And we have and we'll come to this, the hundreds, the thousands, the trillions of scents that we can detect. And our nose and our palate put those two together, send signals to our brain, and our brain interprets them as to the flavors that we actually perceive. I'm going to talk in a bit of detail about that and how that relates to whiskey. So 5 primary tastes, how many things can we actually smell? Now, this is really interesting. Until quite recently, it had been postulated by the Nasal Institute, for want of a better mob, that perhaps humans were capable of detecting up to 10,000 different aromas. And that all got smashed in a 2014 study that suggested that in fact humans were capable of detecting 1 trillion different scents. But here's the problem. Even if we could determine or distinguish 1 trillion different scents, we don't have the words for them. We don't have 1 trillion words in our vocabulary to describe them all. So the other part that's going to go hand in hand with our discussion tonight and training your palate is not just your senses, but also the words and the vocab and the descriptors, because there's no point being able to taste something if you can't describe it, if you can't put it into words that we understand. So yes, thousands and thousands of scents out there, and therefore by definition, lots and lots of flavors, but how many can we, we're almost limited by what we can describe, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Now, again, the Nasal Research Institute of the world determined or tried to suggest some time ago that perhaps there are 10 primary categories of aromas. And that doesn't mean only 10 things we can smell. They put all those hundreds, thousands of scents into 10 basic categories. And look, if you're interested, I'll read them out to you. They were, he says, as he looks off his screen here, fragrant, woody or resinous, fruity, but not citrus, just fruity, not citrus, chemical, minty peppermint, sweet, popcorn, lemon, there's your citrus, and then 2 kinds of what they called sickening odors, which were pungent and decayed. So all those aromas, we believe we can start to pigeonhole into those 10 different categories. So when it comes to training your palate and getting your palate ready to critique whiskey, which is, I guess, what we're talking about, and I'm going to stop there for a second. Let's just back up 1 second. There's a big difference between being at home, having a sip and going, yep, that's yummy, and going about your business, and analysing and assessing a whiskey. And for me, they're 2 very different hats, 2 different activities. And I'm going to be focusing tonight on the second one, which is critiquing whiskey, being analytical about it. For some people, that's not everyone's cup of tea. Some people just want to pour themselves a dram and enjoy it and move on. Great, that is fantastic. To be honest, that's what whiskey's made for. It's what we should be doing. I'm coming from the background tonight of being critical to whiskey, analysing it, assessing it, looking for its flaws, looking for its highlights and its good things, and coming up with descriptors to describe them. Because a large part of what I do is writing tasting notes and the like, and it takes a bit of skill and practice and training to get to that stage where you can do that consistently and reliably, and to the point where it's meaningful for other people, and in my case, other readers, and in our case, society members. So with that in mind, it's something that you've got to become accustomed to. And so we've already discussed the science. When you sip that whiskey, your palate is perceiving the flavors, your nose is combining the aromas with them, and what you're smelling in your mouth cavity, your chamber, which goes up to the back to your nasal cavity and passes over your olfactory nerve endings, sends a message to your brain, and your brain says, oh, that is, and names the flavor. Now, this is where it, to a certain extent, it's subjective, because that descriptor we reach for is all based on our own personal histories and stories. How often does a smell take you back to your childhood? There's a reason for that, and it's because the part of your brain that interprets aromas and smells is right next to the same part of your brain that is responsible for memory. So we make that link. So how often have you smelt something and you go, oh, it takes me back to my grandmother's house or my mum's cooking that she used to do, or whatever. There's a link there. And of course, your recollections and your childhood memories and the things that you smell are going to be different to mine. And so we're going to reach for different descriptors. So when it comes to writing tasting notes that the broader community is going to rely on, I suppose we need to find commonalities. And I get a bit funny reading tasting notes that other people have written, and they're relying on very personal memories or personal experiences. That's not much fun or meaningful for other readers. And in fact, this is what actually led to the development of the local tasting panel for the society here in Australia. Okay, when we launched the society here in Australia in 2002, we used to get what was known as the bottling list at the time, or we would produce our own bottling list. And we received the UK tasting notes, the tasting notes that came with it. And at the time, and certainly when I stepped in as to start the role of Cellarmaster, which was at the end of 2005, we noticed that a lot of the descriptors in the UK tasting notes were making references to products and confectionery and lollies and things that made a lot of sense to UK readers, but not much sense to Australian readers and to Australian members. They were making references to lollies that we had never heard of or couldn't buy here, to flavors of ice cream that didn't mean much. And so for that reason, that was one of the main catalysts where I thought, okay, we need to form a local tasting panel and we need to start writing our own local tasting notes. And the Australian branch was, and still to this day, with the exception of the Japanese branch at the time, was the only branch of the society around the world that was coming up with its own tasting notes. Every other branch was simply reproducing the UK tasting notes. And obviously in other countries, they were being translated into the local language, such as the Japan branch. But that local tasting panel was a tremendous opportunity to really train your palate, because when we went through the whiskies for each shipment, and we had up to 4 or 5 sessions a month pretty regularly, we were going through a large number of samples from a large and huge diverse range of whiskies, and becoming accustomed to going through this experience of training a palate. Now, I want to name some names for you, because I want to pay credit to some of the members that were on that tasting panel at the time, because they are wonderful whiskey buddies of mine, and their service that they lent to the society over those years was amazing. And it was interesting when you taste whiskey with a bunch of different people and you draw on each person's skills, what they bring to the table. And this is something for you to think about as you are training your palate. Find a training partner. Find someone who you can compare things with and compare notes on and bounce off one another, because that's one of the key skills. So many of you would be familiar with Murray Hassan. He's been on the live stream with Matt several times. He tends to get billed as the whiskey bookman these days, but he was a member of the local tasting panel. And Murray was fascinating because he seemed to be able to bring a lot to the table in terms of identifying scents and aromas to do with desserts. I don't know whether he's a dessert man or not, but that was always his good contribution to smell and taste a whiskey and go, oh, that's such and such, and make references to that. Anthony Cowie, who many of you would know, grew up in Scotland. And so he was tremendous for his ability to detect and contribute to our tasting notes some of the Scottish references, either outdoors in the wild or his parents cooking. And a shout out to Jim Cowie, by the way, and Mary as well. Jim and Mary, if you're watching, keep up the fantastic work. Jim and Mary Cowie run the best seafood restaurant in the UK. And that's not a subjective opinion. That's objective, because they've received the award for Best British Seafood Restaurant repeatedly year after year. Jim and Mary, here's to you. But their son, Anthony, on our local tasting panel was fantastic in that regard. Franz Schurer, who many of you would know, Franz just has the most amazing nose and palate, and he would contribute, be able to identify the most amazing, rare and exotic herbs and spices and international foods that the rest of us had no idea what he was talking about, but that was tremendous as well. And many of you would know Shane Cologian as well. Shane is just a walking hydrometer. There's a man who can just taste whiskey and tell you what the ABV is, normally to the decimal point. If it was 58.4, he would certainly get the 58 right, and he'd be within 0.2, 0.3 of the decimal point. Amazing palate and the ability to perceive alcohol and its concentration, which is all part of training your palate, which we're getting to and talking about. Excuse me one moment. Wow. And so that tasting panel was great. And this is why I encourage you, if you want to train your palate, to get a tasting buddy to go through the exercise with you and bounce off ideas. Because what we found when we ran our local tasting panels, we used to have, excuse me, 3 at a time. So we had our pool of the panel, and I would generally have 3 or 4 people for every meeting of the panel, and we would bounce ideas off one another. Someone would suggest something, and then maybe it was a bit of blokey bravado, but we'd try and there was a fair bit of one-upmanship. So if someone, it wasn't good enough, for example, to say, oh, I smell apples. If you said apples, well, the next, someone would immediately say, well, what sort of apples? Green apples, red apples. Can you fine tune it even closer than that? Another one that come up frequently, someone might say, oh, Arnott's biscuits. Well, that's not good enough. What sort of Arnott's biscuits? You know, they've got 10, 12 different varieties. We had to tune in and get all those. Just looking at for some comments. Does a mustache assist with nosing whiskey? Probably not. Matt says heather is one of those notes always coming from Scotland. I have no idea what heather smells like. Mate, that was a fantastic, great point. And that was where, again, Anthony Cowie was fantastic because he did know what heather was like. And on my many trips to Scotland, I make a point of going out to the fields and smelling the heather so I can make that distinction. You can probably detect my voice is a bit raspy at the moment. I'm just going to see to that. Excuse me. And also Tony Chapman. Tony Chapman was on that tasting panel, and Tony was great at identifying the savoury, big savoury man. And so if there were savoury notes on a whiskey, you could trust Tony to get those points as well. So as I say, we'd have this one-upmanship as we would test one another. So sit down when you are training your palate, sit with your tasting buddy, and if you think you detect something, throw it to your tasting partner and say, well, what do you get? Or do you get a variation on that? Herbs is a great thing. Sometimes people can say, oh, that smells herbal. Well, what type of herb? Is it a cooking herb? Is it a garden herb? Is it a wild forest herb? Is it one that we regularly encounter? Flowers and floral is the other thing. It's very common for us to encounter whiskey and go, oh, that's a very floral nose. Great, fantastic, well spotted. Can you improve on that? Can you identify what flower it is? I happen to find gardenia in a lot of Speyside whiskies that I encounter. It's a lovely note. The other great skill is to look for flaws in whiskey. It's all very great to identify what's there. Try and identify what's not there. Or another side to that is, well, what in this is wrong? And I'm going to reference Shane Cologian again, because Shane was great at picking flaws in whiskies. If there was something wrong with the cask, something that was in there that shouldn't have been, or too far, the cut had been taken too far, Shane was great at picking those things up as well. So that's something to be mindful of. The other thing too, talking about nose, is it's a reality. The sexes are not equal in this regard. Females have generally studies have shown females have a better sense of smell, and therefore potentially the ability to detect more flavours and to describe them, because women tend to use more words than men as well. So as you come to train your palate, there's a few things you need to do. Number one is have a clean palate. Cleanse your palate before you sit down for a tasting session, right? If you've just had something very greasy and very fatty and very oily or dairy, that is going to coat your tongue and tremendously impact your palate's ability to interpret what it's receiving. Same goes for really strong things like garlic and onion. It's a golden rule of mine that if I'm going to be tasting whiskey or hosting an event, I don't eat garlic or onion for 24 hours beforehand, because it just kills you. So have a clean palate to start with. If you are doing a critical analysis, make sure you come off a common base each time. There's no point sitting down with whiskies one night having just had a food of certain variety, and then the next night having some other type of food, and then attacking the whiskies and thinking everything's going to be equal. And you will experience this, particularly if you've come to our society tasting events or any tasting event for that matter. You might have tasted a whiskey at that venue on the evening. You loved it. You bought a bottle of it. You got it home. You cracked it open 2 or 3 nights later. It arrived in the mail. And when you tasted it, you think, well, that's not how I remember it on the night. Well, of course not, because your palate was influenced by everything you had on that night. The food you ate at lunchtime that day, the canapes that may have been served at the start of the event. For you to experience that exact same moment a week later when the bottle arrives, you'd need to replicate all those things you ate that day. So when you're going to be critical about whiskey, come off a common base. Now, there's a lot of, this is common knowledge, and it applies across many other areas as well. Jim Murray wrote about this in his Whiskey Bible many editions ago now, where he said, he starts the session with a coffee. He has a black coffee, and that's his common base, so that he's always reset and coming off that same palate influence. Crossing industries for a moment, I dabbled in the music industry in the past, and I've spent a bit of time with recording artists and producers. And I remember spending a lot of time with a sound engineer who everything for him was calibrated to the speakers he was used to. And he could only critique sound and do his work if it came through his speakers that he had set up, because that was the sound that he was calibrated to, I suppose, at the end of the day. So you could play a track for him through his speakers and he'd be able to, he would judge it one way, but if you played it through your speakers at your house or out through the car stereo, he'd have a very different experience. I can see some comments appearing. Let me just check over here. Some questions. Do you mind if I take a break and just answer some questions here? Because there's just a few that come through. Matt Bailey says Monte Carlo biscuits, the king of biscuits. Ooh, I don't know. The Iced Vovo crowd might have something to say about that. And Kingston's as well. Alex Morsey, good to see you, mate. Always a pleasure to have your company. First time Alex came to the Australian Malt Whisky Tasting Championships, I didn't eat lunch or dinner to keep the palate fresh. That went well. It worked well for you, did it? Ben, yes, you make a very good point, Ben. Don't cleanse your palate with an Octomore. Good idea. Darren, do you calibrate your palate? Do you have to go to a whiskey that you know the flavour profile really well that you try first so you can check everything is working in order for those tasting sessions? I may have done that 10, 15 years ago. Less so these days. I'm a bit more confident with my palate and how it works and what I need to do. Certainly, sparkling mineral water works for me. I just find water is obviously a great palate cleanser. The bubbles do a little bit of cleansing work on the tongue as well. And that's just me. I'm not suggesting everyone needs to go do that, but that's how I calibrate. Thank you, Darren. Good question. Liam asks, is there validity in the idea of a calibration dram? Abso-frigging-lutely. Oh, Liam, if I, you know me, mate, I hand out prizes at my tastings. If you'd asked that at a tasting, I'd give you a prize. Absolutely. All tasting panel session stuff I do, and in another whiskey club that I'm a member of, we always have a calibration dram to reset the palate. If you've come to our tasting events, we normally serve a welcome dram. That welcome dram is the calibrator. It's there to get you in the mood. Some of the tasting events I run in Sydney and that I run around the rest of the country, you'll know that if we break for supper halfway through, I always say to people, leave a little bit in the glass so that when we come back from supper, you can have another dram of whiskey to recalibrate. Great question, Liam. That is fantastic, mate. Jane Overeem. Jane, good to see you, my friend. Fantastic. Good of you to join us. Alex calibrates with 90% dark chocolate. Mate, fair call. That is a good one. I like that. That's brilliant. A lot of people do that. Yeah, nice one. So what was I talking about? So we've talked about cleansing your palate. We've talked about coming off a common base if you're going to do critical analysis. And then the other thing, which I touched on at the start, it was to do with flavour and aroma recognition. It's all very well to taste something, but your brain has to make the link to the words used to describe it. So in a cruel sense, you've got to do a bit of schoolwork perhaps and actually train your vocabulary as well and come up with descriptors. And those descriptors will be very personal for you at the start, as we touched on. As you develop, and certainly if you get into a line of work where you're writing tasting notes for others, you've got to come across, I guess, more generic descriptors that everyone can relate to. But you've got to be able to link that. And I remember doing a tasting oh gosh, 20 years ago now. And said to my audience, what do you taste? And there was a guy in the front row who was going, oh, I get, you know, he did that for 30 seconds. He just could not make the link between what he tasted and the words to describe it. So get into the habit maybe of those common descriptors. And there are flavor wheels. Gosh, I should have come prepared and held up an example for you. Flavor wheels and flavor descriptors. I will upload one to our group and our page a bit later on tonight, hopefully, so you can see what I'm talking about. And you can see all those things. It's a wheel, and it's got a whole stack of different flavor descriptors, and you can start to rely on those because they're quite, they're basic, but you'll be able to identify them. So that'll be a good thing to do as well. The other thing too, this is where it gets a bit harsh. I'm sorry to say this, but to train your palate, we've talked about palate, we've talked about the importance of your nose. The reality is we all have different skills and talents in that regard. And some people sadly just don't have a great nose. And if you don't have a good sense of smell, you're probably going to struggle with some aspects of this. So as I say, it sounds a bit harsh. The reality is not everyone's born equal in this regard. So I guess I'm saying some people might have a more uphill climb to get to train the palate than others. And if you're lucky to be a super taster like some of us are, with the high number of taste buds on your tongue, that helps as well. So we all come from a different base. I touched on this before, ABV. As you train your palate, a key thing you need to train yourself to is to be able to identify and be comfortable with the different strengths that whiskey comes at. Now, obviously, by law, minimum 40%. And if you're like most of us, you probably started your whiskey journey with whiskey that was bottled at 40% ABV. So that's kind of your entry level calibration point. We should all know what a 40% whiskey is like. And there's a lot of discussion on the Facebook groups in Australia at the moment about the merits of cask strength whiskey and what's the ideal strength. And a lot of people saying, well, why does 40% whiskey taste so weak to me? At the risk of giving a self-indulgent plug, I've written an article about that on my site, Whiskey and Wisdom. Check that out if you want to. Just put ABV or 40% into the search on that page, and you can read a few articles about that. But part of this process is identifying strength, and then the big thing also is the amazing leap a whiskey can make when it's bottled at 46%. And there's a scientific reason for that, because at 46%, that is the point at which most bottlers choose not to chill filter, because it's got to be at least 46% or higher for either the chill filtration to play its role in, sorry, beg your pardon, I've come from the other direction there. At lower than 46%, chill filtration plays a role. Less so north of 46. So at 46%, most of the bottlers who are bottling at that strength or higher are not chill filtering their whiskey, and therefore you're getting all the oils and fats still coming through in the spirit, and that makes a big difference to the mouthfeel. People, when we talk about palate, focus on flavors, but the mouthfeel and the texture is as much as the experience. I love to explore how tactile a whiskey is, how it grips my palate. That the mouthfeel and the flavors in that regard play a very, very important role. So keep that in mind. Hey, folks, if you've just tuned in late, I'm not Matt Bailey. My name is Andrew Derbidge. We're talking about how to train your palate, and I'm picking up comments on the Facebook group. So if you want to send in comments and questions in real time, tune into our Facebook group and tune in there. So obviously, you then get to higher strengths of alcohol and cask strength, and that's where not just a bit of training comes in, but a bit of, what's the word I'm after here? You need to get used to that high strength. A lot of people, when they confront high alcohol, high ABV whiskey for the first time, all they get is the burn. And they're not perceiving the flavors, they're not perceiving anything else, because all they get is what they perceive to be hot alcohol. So as you train your palate and you move up to higher strength whiskies regularly, such as everything society bottles, at 50, 55, 60% whiskey or higher, training your palate to get over, it's such a crude word, but to get over the burn is an important aspect of it, and that high ethanol. And that's all part of the mix, particularly more and more, because we are seeing now more and more bottlers and distillers 10, 12 years ago made the decision to start filling their casks at higher strength. For a long time, the industry almost universally watered their spirit down to 63.4 or 63.5% when they filled it in the barrel. About 10 to 12 years ago, a lot of the accountants at some distillers realized that they were paying to mature water, and also casks were expensive. And so what could they do to reduce the amount of casks they needed? And some distilleries and distillers made the decision to up the filling strength. And they're now filling into cask at a higher strength, which means 10 to 12 years later, they're coming out higher. So I know, certainly when I started as Cellarmaster back in 2005, almost all the whiskies we were seeing at the time were coming out between 53 to 57, 58%. Occasionally we'd see a 59% one at cask strength. Now we're seeing a lot of whiskies north of 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, even some 65% stuff. And of course, our good friends at Brooklady have brought out some society bottlings at 66%. So there is a higher strength that's out there now. So get used to that. How do you get used to it? It's easy for me to say. How do you do it? Little sips, add water, little steps at a time, work your way up. No one is going to hand you a 70% whiskey and say, here, try this, and bang, you'll be used to it. And I won't lie, certainly when I got into whiskey in the late 90s, I remember encountering my first strength whiskey going, wow, you know, that took some getting used to. So that's part of it as well. Reset with water if you need to. But I'm going to go back to the very first thing I started and said some time ago, practice. How do you train your palate? Practice. Expose yourself to as many different whiskies as you can. We haven't even talked tonight about perception of flavors. Is it from a bourbon cask? Is it from a sherry cask? Is it from a wine cask? We haven't talked about those sorts of things. You know, ordinarily we'd have been getting ready for the Malt Whisky Tasting Championships in July. That's had to be cancelled because of the current situation, of course. But being able to identify if a whiskey is Scotch or Irish, how do you detect those things? These are all things that you can train your palate to recognize over time. And we just don't have time tonight to go into that. I'm just talking really about the basics and what you can do. And that's also, to be honest, getting close to time for tonight and what I had prepared to say. So let me just see if there's any other questions over here that have come through. Dan Woolley, nice question there. Yeah, it's a pet hate of mine, the misspelling of palate. There's 3 ways to spell palate. One of them means this. So people need to appreciate that. And there's that fantastic joke, Matt Bailey, thank you for mentioning, yes, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Yeah, indeed, we know that one. They're the questions over on our group. I'll look here to see if any comments on page. On the page, Andrew Cuff asks, Parma violets, no idea what they are. Yeah, Parma violets indeed. That's a very common UK tasting note, isn't it? Thank you, Todd, for a comment about my voice. It sounds huskier than a pack of sled dogs. Well, my wife likes husky, so maybe there's something in there. So, folks, that's all I had to say tonight. Thank you for your company. I will be back tomorrow night with Matt. We are both going to be at the Society office to do our fantastic festivals tasting pack. Hey, look at this. It's over here. I haven't even unwrapped mine yet. Look at that. It's still, I'll break the seal. Oh, there's some goodies in there. We really look forward to your company tonight. Those of you who purchased the festival's tasting pack, Matt and I will be back on stream to talk you through that. Hey, you've had some tips tonight about how to prepare your palate in advance for that. So make sure your palate's right, because let me tell you now, the festival bottlings are sensational. We really look forward to bringing them to you tomorrow night. Thank you for your company. Thank you for your questions. It truly has been a pleasure drinking with you tonight. I'm going to spend a bit more time on this. This is very special. Farewell, Dead Soldier, 7.28. You're a wonderful champion. Till next time, thanks for your company. Slange, cheers. Till next time. Bye for now.